they're on the Westway, and Claire correctly spotted where they were.
They just come off at Paddington, I think, haven't they?
That's right, so there's not long to go. So why don't we just pop outside, and my colleague Clive Myrie is on the mall with some of the people waiting there. Clive?
Hugh, the nights are drawing in a little quicker now, aren't they? And for the thousands of people who are here, all the way down the mall behind me, to my left, to my right, all the way up to the gates of Buckingham Palace. Many of them, they've been here so long, they will have seen daylight turn to twilight and now to nighttime as they await the arrival of the Queen's coffin. I have to say that despite the fact that there are so many people here, it is really quiet. There is a hush. People are huddled together underneath their umbrellas, trying to keep the chill off. But there's a hush, there's a stillness, there's a solemnity here as the Queen makes her final journey to her old home. And I just wonder, given all the pageantry that we've seen over the last few days, the ceremonial I's that have been dotted and the T's that have been crossed, if this will be a moment for these people where it actually hits home that the Queen is no longer with them. The thousands of flowers that have been left here over the last few days, they've been moved to nearby Green Park, and every one of those bouquets represents an individual, a person, a family paying their own respects to the departed monarch. And it has to be said, and we need to remember this, tonight is the last night that the Queen's closest, her family, will have her to herself, to themselves, because tomorrow she will be back with the people.
Clive, many thanks. Well, progress has been made, and even on a dark, wet evening like this, the progress has been very neat and impressive, and they're approaching the very familiar parts of central London around Hyde Park and Park Lane, and making their way down towards Wellington Arch, which will feature prominently in the state funeral when it happens on Monday. And these streets, these great landmarks here in central London near Buckingham Palace, of course all of them familiar to the Queen from her childhood. And she was born just a few yards away from here in Mayfair, in Bruton Street, which was the home of her grandparents, her maternal grandparents, before, of course, the turmoil came later in life when her father suddenly was obliged to take the throne after his brother decided to abdicate. It was a trauma at the time. I don't think it's too strong a word. And the life of the family was turned upside down. And George VI was greatly loved by people for the way that he stepped up, despite his rather fragile health. And the Queen never forgot that. And I always find it rather moving that people write about the Queen's devotion to her father and the way that she ruled, the way that she reigned, all of it in line with what he had taught her. That was the example that she wanted to emulate. And I find that the strength of that bond, which clearly went on for decades after George VI's death, that she was still reigning in line with the principles that he'd transferred. And there's something very moving about that. So they're within reach, I think, and there's an expectation here in the crowd. Lots of umbrellas out, I have to say, and can't blame people for that. It's not raining as heavily as it was earlier, but there's a vast crowd now gathered outside Buckingham Palace, and I'm just sensing a silence. I'm sensing an air of expectation, solemnity. There's a tranquility to it, which is something you're not used to. I think we all know this, Robert, don't we, when we're normally here for the birthday parade or an event of celebration.
Or just changing the guard. I mean,
yes.
You know, there's always a sense of sort of excitement, anticipation, commotion, and now there is this great solemnity. It's very touching. The Queen's coffin is just about, you mentioned her birthplace at Bruton Street, just up the road, and now that she's just going past the corner of Piccadilly, where where she grew up as a child, a home she loved, they all loved, a home they didn't really want to leave when it was time to move to Buckingham Palace, where of course she's about to arrive now.
My mother remembers early on when they had just taken on the role and they moved into Buckingham Palace, and she remembers coming here to the gardens where the Queen and Princess Margaret, my mother and her sister would play horses. And the Queen was always the rider. Princess Margaret was always the horse. And she did also remember very early on when they went to see one of the films that Noel Coward was producing. It was based on my grandfather's war story of HMS Kelly, and they were on their way for an official screening, and my mother was in the car with the King and Queen, the two princesses, and Princess Elizabeth said to her younger sister, "Wave, you must wave at the crowd." So from a very early age, she was that person. She was the one to lead.
Well, that leadership manifested itself very clearly over a very long reign. Leadership often given in a very subtle way, in a very understated way, but one got the impression time and again that when a decision was made, that decision was very clear and was conveyed in a very firm way. It had been thought through, it was measured, but it was delivered and taken in a sometimes forceful way, but always a determined way. Here we have the flashing lights, the outriders approaching, I think, quite close to Marble Arch, unless they're now drawing down towards Wellington Arch. The crowd's building up, so getting closer and closer to Buckingham Palace itself.
It's remarkable, isn't it, the great variety of the British weather. We had the rainbows on Thursday. We had the sunshine in Edinburgh this morning and yesterday. And in the rain, those lights just sparkling because of the weather, and even more brightly one can see that, especially designed. And again, the visibility, even in death, we can see the Royal Standard, we can see the Queen, we can see the coffin.
She would always make a point, even driving at night, when she must have been terribly tired after a state occasion, she would always make sure the light was on in the car, not because she was a show-off at all, it's because she knew people had come out, they expected to see her. Visibility, I have to be seen to be believed.
It's the ancient tradition of monarchy, which is that you have to be seen.
And therefore, the bright colours worn at Royal Ascot, for example, or at any trooping the colour at any official event.
It's extraordinary to think how much the world has changed in all terms. You were talking about technology. Again, I keep referencing my mother because she really is the one who was there so close to the Queen, especially when that moment she actually became Queen. And they needed to make their way back to England. And the world's press had already descended on Nairobi Airport by the time the then Princess Elizabeth arrived. And the world's press put their cameras on the floor, on the ground, as a sign of respect for the Queen in mourning. No one took a photograph of her. Imagine now.
Well, I rather wish, I have to say, that tradition were being followed now, because I do think that there must be a respect. And it's not to blame people. I think so many people now have grown up with an iPhone attached to their hand, and that filming something makes it real. No, witnessing makes it real.
Well, I have to say, in Edinburgh, it was very firmly laid down there will be no iPhones and photography at the vigil of the lying in state, and I'm sure that will be the same here.
And it was adhered to very faithfully.
Everybody.
There was no issue at all.
Impeccably, yes. Just coming down Park Lane, coming up to Hyde Park Corner, I think.
So we can see a big police presence there as we come to the southern end of Park Lane, and very soon they'll be turning over to the left and then on the approach to Constitution Hill, the way down to the palace itself. Journey the Queen made probably thousands of times in her long life.